So here's the thing that we have been sensing was an issue and did not know how to verbalize it. We went to visit a church in Austin, Texas, and they just did one of the guys did a whiteboard thing, and he started drawing. They draw these circles for everything, even if there's no reason to make them this diagram. But anyway, this one actually was really helpful. He said there are different spheres of authority, and people need to know which one they're operating in. Otherwise, they have false expectations and will get mad about something that's actually not wrong. It's just that they thought they were operating in a different sphere of authority. So I'll give you 3 of them that apply to us. Brothers and sisters in Christ, that's those of us who are believers. That's one of our realms in which we operate. We're friends in Christ. Ephesians 5:21 calls us to, as brothers and sisters in Christ, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So that's how we're going to operate there. As brothers and sisters in Christ, when that's where we are, we're going to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. We've also got pastors and members. That's another component. Pastors in, actually, somebody read Hebrews 13:17. Just read it out really loud. Hebrews 13:17. And then somebody else go ahead and look up Ephesians 6:5-9. Somebody got Hebrews 13? Right, so there's an authority that pastors have that involves shepherding and caring for the souls of those who are members. So members are accountable to pastors. Pastors are accountable to God. That verse says that we will give account, those of us we will give an account as pastors for those who were members who were entrusted to our care. All right, so that's a different realm than simply brothers and sisters in Christ. Okay, there's an accountability and an authority that exists there that doesn't actually exist just with brothers and sisters in Christ. Then, for those of us, because we are actually in an employment situation, you add another component, which is that of boss and employee. Now, for clarification, you are here right now because of this. This is a work trip, right? The way that Midtown employs people, we don't employ people because they're Christians. Now, you have to be a Christian to get employed, but no one gets paid on our staff because they are a believer. And no one is on staff because they are a pastor. That's not how that works. You can be a pastor and not be paid on staff. In fact, we are trying to get some of those. We're working towards it. So the reason that anyone is employed is because you have a job to do that would help our church flourish. You have tasks to accomplish. So you're not employed because you're a believer, and you're not employed because you're a pastor. You're employed to get a particular type of job done. And this is a category that Ant actually said recently. He thinks because we teach so well that church is a family, people don't actually know then how to operate in the boss and employee authority sphere. They just don't know how it works or what they're supposed to think about. But as soon as you take it out of church, it becomes really intuitive. So there's just different ways that authority works, and there's different ways of communication. So let's see. So a boss has a different kind of authority over an employee than a friend or even a pastor does. So a boss can say, you need to get to your job at 9 a.m. If a friend calls you and says, hey, I was just thinking, you need to go to your job at 9 a.m., that's an inappropriate use of authority. You don't have that. Also, what are you doing? This is weird. Also, a pastor doesn't. That's not something that a pastor has authority to say, right? Like, how weird if one of our pastors calls someone and says, hey, I was thinking 9 a.m. for you at your job. What are you doing? But a boss? That's absolutely something that a boss can say. But if you don't know this, and you think that as an employee, we're supposed to function just like we're brothers and sisters in Christ, and your supervisor says, hey, I want you to come in at 9, well, all of a sudden, they're wrong. All of a sudden, you don't understand what's happening. I thought we were family. I don't understand what you're doing. What are you doing telling me what I'm supposed to do? So we've had residents who had very simple job descriptions. They were told things they needed to get done, and they actually had a real problem with it. But then they went and got a job somewhere else, and their boss told them what to do, and they were like, of course, that's how it's supposed to work. And it's like, no, that's how it's supposed to work here. This is where we were for that. That was work-related. That was work-related. So we didn't read this passage. I'll let you read it later. But this actually says that there are those who are under authority in the workplace are to respect and honor the authority of those who are the supervisors, who are the bosses. So a boss is going to give high expectations. They're going to nitpick on some things. You are here right now. This is a work trip. So for those of us who are on staff, this was not an optional trip. For those of you who are married to someone on staff, it was optional. right? Because as bosses, we don't get to say, hey, your spouse has to do something. That'd be inappropriate. So spouses, you are here because we're your pastors and your brothers and sisters in Christ. So it starts to get a little confusing, and you got to know which hat to wear. But if I work at a bank and my boss says, hey, on Monday we're doing a branch meeting, everybody will be there. You need to be there, see you at 9. I wouldn't say, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. That sounds like a lot of people. I'd be overwhelmed. The boss would say, no, that's not how it works. This is part of your job. You can do this job or you can quit this job. But those are your options. You don't have the option of just not being there. So in the same way, if I would have said, Alan, I'm not thinking I'm going to do staff retreat. Too many people and too hard. He would say, it doesn't matter what you want to do. See you on Monday in Black Mountain, right? Because that's here. That's work-related. But then if we're in the office, so Chris and Wes, Wes has a direct report straight to Chris. So Chris is Wes's supervisor. Chris can walk in Wes's office and say, hey, will you do this monthly report and do it this way and make this change? But then if they go to lunch together, Chris doesn't get to say, hey, Wes, sit there and I want you to order the tuna. Because that's here. That's not work-related. You see how it works? So there's different ways that authority works. If it's work-related, though, then this is boss-employee. You should expect your boss to tell you some things to do and how to do them, because that's how bosses work. Bosses' jobs are to help employees do their jobs. So that's how it needs to be received and accepted. Let's see. Yep. All right, so that's authority. Here's communication. Communication is different. So here, this would be like in my life group. I know who I can speak very directly to about things, and I know in my life group, if I come direct with something, this person's going to totally shut down and is going to be weird towards me for 6 months. So I modify my communication here because I'm submitting to others out of reverence for Christ, right? As pastors, we know we're going to have to flex some on that as well, that we're called to shepherd people's souls, and sometimes that means rebuke, and sometimes that means encourage, but we're going to modify our communication and adjust to try to accommodate for the members that we're speaking to. But here, bosses don't adapt, employees adapt. And here's how I can prove it. When I said that at first, I was talking to Courtney about it, because for Courtney, she actually is like a quarter-time editor, so she's on here, and for me and her, it's another circle of husband and wife. So you talk about confusing. We could be lying in bed at night, and she goes, hey, I didn't like how you said that today to me at work. And it's like, oh, gosh, this was husband and wife setting, and you just jumped right over here to Boston. It's like, we can't have this. We're going to have to clarify. But anyway, so she asked, when she comes back from maternity leave, what does she do if she doesn't like how I said something to her? And I was like, all right, let me show you this chart. that would be here. And I will do my best, but I don't think you say that, because that's not something that you would say here. And she was like, what are you talking about? Of course it's something that you should say. Are you saying it doesn't matter how you say things to people that work for you? And I was like, no, I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying I don't think that's what an employee says to a boss. And she was like, no, I don't think you're thinking about it right. Then I said, all right, when you taught at Dreher High School, would there ever have been a time that you walked into the principal's office and said, hey, Ms. Stiglbauer, I don't like your tone in that meeting that we just had? And she was like, oh, no, absolutely not. That'd be very inappropriate. Oh, I hear it now. I see what you're saying, right? There's a way that this is supposed to operate in which the employee is supposed to adapt to the boss. Does that make sense? So I'll put it more specifically. The communication around our office regarding tasks is going to be direct and clear and concise, and it's not always going to be an encouragement sandwich. You know what an encouragement sandwich is? You did really, really great on this. This is an area of concern you might improve, but hey, way to go over here on that. That's not what your supervisor always has time to do. Sometimes they're just going to need to say, hey, this wasn't how we need to do it, and I want you to do it this way next time. And we're just going to keep moving. But are you tracking with me on how that's different? But if your expectations are, we're brothers and sisters only, or we're pastors and members. So like we've had people who will leave the residency, and I don't mean to pick on residents, it's just there have been more extreme cases. We've had people who left because they thought the residency was going to be sitting in a pastor's office studying the Bible with them all day. And then they got told, this is not what we're doing, and you need to go do what's on your job description. And they got really hurt and offended. And it's like, well, no, you misunderstood where we were operating. Does the big idea make sense? Alan, anything you'd say or add or say differently to that? It's something we've been kind of noodling on and we're trying to get better at clarifying it. Yeah. So just clarifying. So like a couple weeks ago, Cole just stuck his head in my office and was like, hey, can we chat? It's about life, not about work. So it's like, yes, and thank you for saying that, because now we're either here or here. So he asked me a couple questions, and I was like, well, I'm not telling you what you ought to do definitively. I can give you some suggestions, because we're here and here, right? This isn't work-related. So it is helpful to just know. For those of you who are spouses, it's helpful for you to know what we're doing, because for those of you who are spouses, for example, I am one of your pastors, so we can relate here, and I'm a brother and sister in Christ. But when it comes to the employment of your spouse, that's not really something that we're going to talk a ton about, because that's going to be more about them and less about you. Does that make sense? And you can even think about if my spouse worked at a bank, would I talk to that person's bank manager about this? Would I feel like that was an appropriate thing to do or not? And if it's like, no, I definitely wouldn't, then it's like, all right, well, we're talking, so we want to talk about things that are pastor, brother and sister in Christ, work-related, that's going to go through the employee. And it just gets convoluted because we're doing more. If all we had was this circle, it cleans up everything. It cleans up everything. And if all we had was this circle, and then every now and then we go to lunch and we're friends, everybody would say, these bosses are unbelievable. They take us to lunch every now and then. But if the expectation is we're all going to be best friends and pastors reading our Bibles all the time and we only go to lunch once a month, it's like, these guys don't even care about my soul. And it's like, well, yeah, we do. It's just, you had a different set of expectations. All right, here's Chris.